thank you guys all for coming. I appreciate it. We might have a few more trickle in, but we do want to get started because we have a lot of information to get through. See a lot of familiar faces. There's some that may not have participated in October, but the impetus for this discussion really came from our planning commission, who identified the Northwest Subarea sub-area as an area that needs some additional attention as we plan for the future and as growth continues to occur in Superior. So we have a consultant team of 4 individuals. Darcy, who was here before, and Sung, who led the October kind of outreach. We have added 2, Cheney Bostic and Matt Prosser, who have done some additional analysis that you guys are going to see tonight, both on the economic kind of piece and on really some planning scenarios, which you'll get through. So I'll turn it over to Darcy now to kind of initiate the conversation, and she'll kind of explain how you use your clickers and all that stuff. But thank you guys all for coming.
Great. Thanks, Stephen, and thanks again, everyone, for being here. I think the jiggling is actually coming from upstairs, so hopefully it's not too distracting here, but we'll see how that goes. Just a quick reminder for those of you who are new to the process, this is kind of a 2-step effort. As Stephen said, we started in the fall and did some initial community engagement. We did 2 community meetings and an online questionnaire survey, just to kind of get some initial sense from the community about the different types of issues that needed to be addressed for this area, and the degree to which the community really thought this was a priority. And we are now into step 2. And I'll give you a little bit more background on that. So we focused last fall. Those of you who were part of that will, recognize some aspects of this. But really thinking, really provided some information about what's been happening in this area, what's happening in the region. You're just trying to give some context for the types of changes that are likely to be noticed in this area over the coming years, but also what's happened over the last 10 years. And I think that the sense was there's a lot that's happened. If you're interested in kind of the specifics of that, we do have a lot of that background information posted on the town's website. And we also talked a fair amount about the policies and regulations that the town has in place currently. So we really focused on, here's where we think we're going, based on the plans that we have in place. Is this something we need to look at going forward? And so based on that discussion, we had about 600 people that participated in the fall outreach. We met with Planning Commission and Town Board, and the sense is we definitely need to continue the conversation. And so we are now getting into our step 2 work, and that's really to start thinking about, to build on what we've heard so far and the conversations that we had in the fall, and get a little bit more specific. We'll talk about 2 different areas in particular tonight. The marketplace and original town. It does not mean that the other areas that we talked about in the fall have kind of fallen out of the discussion, but we've got a lot to cover for those particular areas, and that will really kind of circle back to in terms of the overall big picture. So we'll kind of do a little bit of big picture discussion tonight, and then dive in and spend most of our time on those 2 areas. But if you're interested in those other areas, never fear, they will come back. But the goal really for this next phase is to really think about how do we move forward. Specifically, where do we want to go, and then what are the options we have in terms of how might we move forward from here, based on where the community's preferences lie. So in terms of process, and this is also available online, but we're basically focused on kind of phase 1, phase 2 right now. It's a pretty quick process. The process in the fall was short. This is a priority for the town, and there's a desire to kind of keep this conversation moving. So we're looking to, we've got the meeting this evening. We had a meeting with the business community this afternoon. We've got another community meeting on Wednesday night at the sports stable. And then we'll have the online input opportunity again, which will be up for at least 2 weeks. We'll kind of see, level of interest and activity, and, potentially we might keep that up longer. From there, we will compile everything we've heard, circle back to the Planning Commission in June and the Town Board in July, continue that conversation, and refine kind of the directions coming out of the community conversations, and then come back to all of you sometime in the September timeframe to talk about some preliminary directions for those areas, kind of based on the conversations with town board and planning commission. So pretty quick process in terms of just determining where might we go and what that will look like. So we're not necessarily coming back with a plan, kind of a full-formed plan in October. In September, it's really kind of, here's the direction we want to go, and we recognize that for different parts of Superior, the recommendations may be different in terms of, how to move forward. So it's really focused on how do we implement those priorities that the community has, and we'll kind of see how that takes shape. So we're going to start with just a few warm-up questions. Those of you who were here in the fall, you'll remember this, but I think we're just trying to get a sense as we go through the different representation that we've got. So if you haven't used one of these before, it's just like your remote control, less channels, just select the corresponding number. And that also helps us get a sense of numbers here. All right, going once. Okay. So a lot of folks from Original Town, but a good chunk from Rock Creek as well. So there's a little bit of background question. This is one where you can select more than one answer in terms of just your interest. What brought you here tonight? Going once. Okay. And then just curious how many of you did participate in the fall, either attended a meeting or filled out the questionnaire online. Over to Matt Prosser. He's going to give us a little bit of background on the market context that really, this was one of the areas where we knew in the fall, kind of based on the discussions that we had, that we needed a little bit more information to inform the discussion. So he's done some initial research, and he's going to talk about some of his preliminary findings.
Thanks, Darcy. Yeah, again, I'm Matt Prosser. I'm with a firm called Economic and Planning Systems. We're a land use economics firm. I'm based out of the Denver office for the company. And so we were, in a little bit of background, I've do a fair amount of similar planning work like this with Darcy, but also worked on the 2012 comprehensive plan for the town of Superior, and participated in a ULI TAPS panel, so a technical advisory panel for that the town initiated with ULI 2 years ago, I guess it was, to look at the Superior marketplace. So I'm sort of rehashing some of the findings that we found from that and sort of updating that. So what I did is I've compiled a market assessment. The slides you'll see are primarily focused on the marketplace and sort of setting the context for what the opportunities could be from a commercial standpoint for the marketplace as we think about potential changes to that area. And so starting off, we've done tons of research on national trends related to retail. So and it's really, the things that are going on really have a big impact when it comes to the marketplace. And so retail is changing dramatically day by day. And a lot of that is driven by the presence of online retailers, the Amazons of the world. Over the last 15 years, growth in online sales is about 20-30% annually, whereas brick and mortar, so everyday retail stores, physical stores, only growing about 2 or 3%. And so most of the growth that's occurred in the retail market, especially since the last recession, has been in this kind of e-commerce world. And so what that's doing is really bifurcating the retail market into two markets. One being oriented towards convenience and low-cost retail offerings, and the other moving towards more experience-oriented or handmade, local kind of oriented, retail that provides more than just a product, but sort of an experience as you're doing it. As well, food and beverage is a growing component of retail centers. It used to be about a third of a typical retail center was some sort of food restaurant or so, or bar, or things like that. But now it's like half and half, and so a growing portion of the market. And so as we start to think about Superior and the Superior marketplace, wanted those trends in mind. And so we looked at the trade area for a larger trade area for a center like the Superior marketplace and tried to assess what's going on. And what we're finding is there has been some housing growth in the area, but a lot of the large amount of housing growth that's occurred has been in Boulder and Broomfield, further away from the US 36 corridor. And with retail, I mean, a lot of what drives demand obviously is the growth in households. And so that shift of growth, or the majority of growth occurring kind of on the edges of the trade area, is changing where the opportunities related to retail for Superior exist. But I will say that the communities, Lafayette, Louisville, and even Superior with the downtown project are growing as well. And so there is opportunity related to that. But for that larger kind of the major trade area, a lot of the growth is occurring on the edges, and that's really been reflected in the growth of retail spaces within the northern metro area. And so a lot of the new growth, which is shown in blue dots, new major centers that have popped up over the last 10 years. So most of those have occurred along the I-25 corridor in Boulder. And so a lot of what used to be sort of the core of the retail world in the north part of the Denver metro area was the US 36 corridor, and now that's shifted pretty dramatically to I-25. And the redevelopment of 29th Street in Boulder is also kind of reinvigorized somewhat the Boulder retail market. And so, so more and more, I think that some of the households that would be shopping in the retail trade area or shopping in Superior are being attracted out to other centers. And you can see that change has impacted some of the centers along the corridor. Obviously, the Westminster Mall, has completely redeveloped and is gone. We're also seeing places like the Flatiron Marketplace losing major anchors such as Best Buy, and now they're looking to reinvest. And so, or try to refill spaces and reinvest. And so typically the first thing they do when they lose major anchors is try to find a new anchor to refill those spaces. But a lot of the major retail national anchors that would take a big space already exist along the US 36 corridor, and also now exist in the I-25 corridor. So there's a lot of opportunity for attracting those new larger retailers. And so retail center owners have been looking at other ways to try to activate retail centers. And a lot of what they're doing is looking at adding a mixture of uses, adding residential, office, hotel as a way to create more activity and spur demand in their centers. And so as we look at the retail market conditions in the town of Superior and Boulder, they track pretty well. The town of Superior hasn't really attracted much retail space in the last 10 to 15 years. And vacancies have raised recently. Primarily that's driven by the vacancy of the Sports Authority box within Superior Marketplace. But other than that, generally the rental rates and other things track pretty closely with Boulder County. So the market is strong, aside from that one vacancy, but we haven't seen much growth. And I think that's sort of iterated to the changes in the larger trade area is part of that reason. And so as we think about Superior Marketplace, what are the conditions there? I mean, I think the first thing to realize, and is something we need to keep in our minds, is that the retail sales tax that's generated in the center is huge to the town. It's a humongous component of the fiscal health and the annual budget of the town. And so making sure that we have a viable, strong center going forward is something that needs to be a major focus. But we also do have some vacancy in the space. We have the Sports Authority that I mentioned, about 10% of the center is vacant, and a lot of the sort of inline smaller spaces here and here have a lot of turnover. They have some sort of chronic vacancies where, and that's due somewhat to the kind of odd design of the center. It's a really, really big center, and the typical traffic generation that a big store like Target would create doesn't occur for some of these kind of inward shopping areas because they're so far away. Nobody's going to park at Target and then walk all the way across that parking lot to go to that store. And so I think the dispersedness, the largeness of the center makes it difficult for some of the retail spaces to thrive. And so that's something to consider as we think about changes to the center. And then we also looked at the office market conditions. There's been limited office added in the general area around Superior, aside from new development within Arista and Interlochen area. However, vacancy rates are pretty low generally across all the communities in the area, which would indicate demand. And the rental rates are fairly strong, which also indicates demand. We do have a little bit higher vacancy in the town of Superior. Some of that's driven by a new office building that was built next to the sports barn that's leasing up now. And actually, that'll be an interesting test case. A new office building being built in Superior, trying to lease new space. If that's a successful project, that might be proof of additional demand for more office within Superior, and potentially could be introduced into the marketplace. However, and I should also say, there's opportunity coming out of Boulder. There's a lot of firms that are looking perhaps for lower cost or more space that are located in Boulder now, but can't find that because Boulder is such a constrained market and has a pretty limited amount of office space that is attractive to growing businesses. And so there might be opportunity there, and however I'm gonna say is that prospective tenants are gonna be wanting existing space, and or they're gonna wanna be in areas that have activity and amenities. And so is there enough vibrancy necessarily in the marketplace to attract office? I'm not sure if that's true right now. And so our findings really are, the main goal is to increase retail demand, and we think doing that is really to continue to grow the employment and housing base in the town and in the area. And we also think that there's an opportunity to add additional uses to the marketplace as a way to activate the center more. So the thought of the more people that are coming for more reasons, the better for the center. And so we think in terms of new uses that could be introduced to the marketplace, multifamily residential is probably the most feasible use in the short term, something that could be potentially attracted in the next 1 to 3 to 5 years perhaps. Office and the hotel uses may also be attracted to the areas or to the marketplace, especially due to the access to US 36 and the visibility from US 36. But they're most likely going to need some activity going on within the center for them to be interested. And then I mentioned there's an opportunity to potentially reconfigure portions of the retail center to create more attractive retail spaces. And some of those inline smaller spaces that I was pointing out struggle because of their location and design. And so is there a way for us to work with the property owner to reconfigure areas to potentially create better places and generate more sales? So with that, that's the market context.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Great. So we're going to talk just for a few minutes about kind of the big picture context. I think one of the things that came through clearly in the conversations last fall is that while a lot of folks were participating, they had specific interest in a particular area of Northwest Superior, there was a strong sense from the community that we really need to be thinking about this area as a whole. It's important to the community at large, and so we need to not get too focused on the individual aspects of this and think about where we're going overall with this particular sub-area. And so we spent some time just thinking about digesting a lot of the written comments that we got, the feedback that we got in the fall, and we've kind of tried to boil that down to some overarching principles to guide the scenario discussion tonight, but also just this process as a whole. And so I'll touch on each of these, but I think the way to look at these is thinking about, what are the common themes between the different parts of Northwest Superior? What are we trying to do overall with this area? And so some of these get more specific, but I want to run through these quickly and then get your feedback in terms of, have we heard you correctly in terms of kind of where the community wants to go? So the first guiding principle focuses on leveraging our access to transit. We talked in the fall about the addition of the new BRT station and that's a real opportunity for the town that connects Union Station in Denver, downtown Boulder, and you guys are proximate to those major employment centers. So there is some opportunity there to look at that. Matt talked about the ULI study that was done, and the purpose of that was really to look at what types of transit-oriented development opportunities might we have in this area. And that was some early work that was done thinking about how to leverage that opportunity. So Matt's kind of touched on some of those opportunities that came out of the ULI study as well, looking at expanded mix of uses, housing types, trying to create more of a destination there that's really going to help make the most of that opportunity, but also support the big boxes that you already have in place. So encouraging the vitality of the center as a whole, which takes us to our next principle, which is really thinking about how do we help this area thrive in the years going forward. So the center right now is about 20 years old, and as Matt kind of alluded to, a lot of centers within the region are starting to be modified, some in very significant ways, other in more targeted ways, but the goal here is really to think about how do we keep the solid anchors that we do have doing well, and if not better than they are today, while addressing some of the challenges that we have and that the community was really concerned about going forward. So trying to address some of the smaller turnover, business turnover, the vacancies, creating more of a destination. So all of these things that really kind of come out of the market context as well as the feedback. We heard a lot of interest in more restaurant options from the community. Matt talked about, kind of the shift in the percentages. Maybe that's an opportunity. Wayfinding and visibility is something we heard a lot about, particularly from the business community. We met with them earlier today. Still a major concern in terms of in the near term, really needing to focus on those issues, as well as when we think about some of these bigger picture options that Cheney's going to talk about. Improving multimodal access, managing congestion, a lot of related issues here, ranging from, things like increasing and improving the pedestrian connections between the neighborhoods in Northwest Superior and the marketplace, so making it easier for people to walk there, feeling safe crossing the streets with all of the traffic flow that goes through that area. We heard concerns about cut-through traffic and people kind of using that Marshall Road connection as a backdoor road to Boulder. The traffic counts give us some sense of that. About a quarter of the daily trips kind of use that, continue on to Boulder through there. So a lot of different things that we heard, but I think the overall message was we need to really think about improving the circulation in this area, making it function better, but it really needs to function within the context of Northwest Superior overall. So a lot of different things to consider there as we go forward. Fourth principle focuses on just the overall concept of being proactive about what happens in this area. There's a sense in talking with residents that we need to be ahead of this. We need to be thinking proactively in terms of what we want to see here and really help guide that growth. And so this really thinks about what are those types of opportunities that we have? What can we do now to position ourselves as a community better in the future? And so all of the things we'll talk about tonight really kind of lead into this, support of this idea. And the last one is related, but important enough to call out separately, is protecting the character of original town. We talked in the fall about the existing tools that you have in place. We're going to talk in more detail about that tonight. And then thinking about the potential impacts of future growth on this portion of original town. So a lot of community concerns in this particular area, everything from just the scale of development to access and thinking about, some of the larger potential impacts on this area. So we'll talk a lot more about this in the second half of the meeting, but wanted to start off with just kind of those big picture ideas before we get into it. So those of you who did participate in the fall, we're going to start off, we're going to do some more questions, but we're also going to pause and have a little bit of a discussion after each of these bigger questions. So first want to get a sense of, based on the principles that I covered, do these generally fit in terms of your priorities for this area? And we'll have a chance to talk about maybe some of what we've missed if you've got ideas. So just want to get an initial reaction. Have we heard you correctly? on track. So anyone that didn't answer that way in terms of kind of well or very well, other thoughts, what have we missed? Are there things that you thought ought to be on here that aren't, things that you think we haven't captured correctly that you want to share with us? Okay.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
The traffic impact, any of it. You call it cut-through traffic, it's a public street. Some people do come up West Cold Creek and go over 176 to hit 170 to miss that. But, so if you put anything else in Superior, what do we do with the cars? What do we do with the traffic? That's one thing. And the other thing is, when the people that come to Costco get tired of sitting at the stoplight 3 or 4 times, they're not coming back. When Costco's profit level goes down because we think we need to do all this fancy building and all these apartments and all this for walking traffic, they're moving out. And our taxes are gonna go so high, you can't afford to live here. Has anybody thought about that? If they leave, where are we gonna pick up the revenue they take with them? I mean, I don't have a golden goose if you take that one.
So I think,
And all you're talking about is more people, more density, which brings more cars, more people. They're leaving. They'll leave. They go right down the street.
so I think our overall discussion, Jeannie's going to talk about some of the specifics, concepts in the marketplace, is how to make it work better. So a lot of the types of changes that we're going to look at, the goal is to try to, those are folks who are likely to work in Boulder or work in Denver who aren't necessarily going to be driving everywhere. So yes, you're going to see some changes. Part of what we're going to be doing, based on what we hear tonight and on Wednesday, is doing some additional traffic modeling. So as we look at different options for the marketplace, we get some preliminary direction from the community in this round. We'll be taking that back and doing some additional modeling to test some of those ideas and look at what those impacts might be. So it's absolutely part of the conversation. But the goal is to make the overall picture work better. And I think it's not necessarily a one-to-one in terms of if you add more, it's going to automatically make it worse. So that's what we really need to evaluate. So, yes.
I have a question, which is, are there any developments going on in South Louisville, just on the other side of 36, around the movie theater or the big box stores there, that would impact what we should be doing in the marketplace?
So I know that they've been looking at a lot of different options. Stephen, you're...
Let Lisa answer that.
Hi, I'm Lisa Ritchie, I'm on the Planning Commission, and I also am a planner for the city of Louisville. So some of you may know that the Sam's Club has been vacant over there. It's probably the largest property that potentially could redevelop. It's been vacant now for about 8 years, and the city of Louisville is going to be undergoing a market study similar to what it sounds like the work here for the Sam's Club site to look at possible redevelopment scenarios for Sam Club. There's no active applications for redevelopment over there right now. The policies in place at this point don't call for additional residential in the McCaslin area right now, but the market study may take that in a different direction. Sure.
Any other comments before we...
Yeah, has any of this been looked at about when the other side of the McCaslin, on the east side, develops out? You're going to have 1,400 homes over there. Okay, 1,400 layout, probably to be almost 3,000 more vehicles a day. People going in and out of there.
So part of what we're looking at is what's happening in this area as well as the surrounding areas. So yes, that's being taken into account.
That intersection there on McCaslin and Marshall gets clogged up. I kind of agree with George what he's saying. 96th Street, Broomfield's got a real nice area to develop for Costco over there. And it's easy in and easy out. They will have no problem getting people in and out of there. And we got to watch what's going on there and what we do. Because Costco's our #1. And if we have to do something with Marshall Road in alignment to get that back where it should be or whatever. And I think they just probably put too much and too small up there when Costco's going. All of Costco's parking is pretty much taken up. And so, I mean, we just gotta be real careful what goes on around that area. You know, it's a bad area to develop around because of the infrastructure of the roads in that. The Turnpike comes down through there, the off ramps, Marshall Road, Castle. I mean, it's just kind of one big conglomerate of roads that's coming into that area. And I think we're gonna find that when the east side of that road develops out, we're gonna have some serious issues going on there at that interchange.
So it's a big part of the conversation, you're absolutely right. Janie's gonna talk more about circulation and access within the marketplace, so I think what I wanna do is shift into that conversation and we can kind of continue that after you've had a chance to kind of hear some of her thoughts on that. So.
All right, so my job was to look at the Superior Marketplace specifically. I'm an urban design architect planner, and this is a focus area of mine. So both transforming shopping centers. This is a nationwide trend. I've worked on numerous in the state. But shopping centers are reinventing themselves. They are no longer drive here and shop, right? People are looking for a different experience. People are shopping on Amazon. Costco might be gone in a few years regardless of what we do because of online shopping. So we kind of came at this with the mindset of, well, what happens then if we do nothing? I mean, on one end of the spectrum, what happens if we don't do anything? And the worst case scenario is that you would lose one of your major anchors. And nationwide, and what Matt presented is that a lot of these centers are looking for more mix of uses, more experiential places, more restaurants, more activities, things for you to bring kids to, and events can occur, so more of a 24/7 kind of place. Just going back to the TAP report, which we've touched on, they recommended to actively engage the community and think about possible futures for this, and then plan for that. So right now the zoning says all you can do there is retail, more of what exists. What we're finding is that that's not the trend, right? So we need to be proactive in the zoning of that area if you want to catch the future. The possible future. So let's, the existing circulation there is, well, it's not circulation. I wouldn't call it circulation, it's in and out, right? And part of that is because of the location and this intersection here. But once you get onto Marshall Road and come into the center, there's really, one way in, one way out, and that's why you see the traffic that you have right now. There's already a system, sort of a network to get into those parking lots. And if we just started to think about them more as complete streets, so places that, function better, some of these would be looking at condensing areas, and others would be making them wider, making them streets where you have bike lanes and cars and buses and people can all travel in there. So if you start to look at that as a network, that disperses the traffic. It gives people options, right? You don't only have to come in and out of Marshall, you can use other ways. So that's one thing that we looked at. These are all kind of concepts that we kept in mind. We're going to show you 3 alternatives, but first, these are the overarching concepts. Number 2 being that the big and mid boxes are money for the town, as we already heard. So it would be irresponsible of us to plan something that completely wipes out the center, does something crazy. So we're trying to be realistic. The third thing that we're finding in our analysis is that the marketplace, it really operates as 2 or 3 separate places, right? You've got the Target and Costco on the west side. You've got the Whole Foods, kind of those magnets that draw the region to different retailers, but it lacks a center. And these are what we're finding. More of these inline retailers are the more struggling places. So. Back to one of our guiding principles is, can you leverage the transit center, right? There are 1,000 people approximately boarding or getting off of the bus every day, and right now the probably the majority of those are individuals driving single cars to there and parking and getting on the bus and then coming back and getting in their cars and leaving. More traffic. But if we start to think about this network, might there be a possibility for people to ride their bikes to the bus station, or when you're going to the airport and taking a sky bus, have a cup of coffee before you go out, adding more experiences along the way. So Superior Marketplace, we're gonna go through these 3 scenarios. These are just 3 of many, many, many possible solutions. So we're gonna ask for your feedback. Let me run through each of these. And also I wanna say that these are phased, looking at how these might develop realistically over time. And maybe the first phase is all you need. So these are more very long-term visions. And before we go through those, so things that we kept in mind for all these: retain major anchors, improve the function and the vitality, concentrate or relocate underperforming pad sites, because there are quite a few, incorporate complementary uses that will add to the vibrancy of the existing retailers, build upon the downtown Superior, don't compete with that, concentrate highest intensity uses away from the existing neighborhoods, especially original town, where it is that more low scale original architecture there. Cultivate interest in redevelopment and be realistic with these solutions. So this is what the marketplace looks today. We've got all the labels on there. So Whole Foods down here, we're looking west down Center Drive. And scenario A, we're calling Center Drive. I think that's what they had in mind when they designed the marketplace, is to really create a center spine there, but again, it lacks the people to make it active. Or putting a mixed-use building along near the transit. Now, RTD parking, this is on RTD parking lot, so we phased it so that RTD parking could move to the periphery while this is being constructed. And then looking at future phases coming on in. So, and then all of these alternatives, there's an approved Ethan Allen construction that we've put in. Phase 2 then would build a parking structure for shared parking for the RTD lot and new residences. It adds a community use. This could be a library or a community center or something for the whole community as a destination within the marketplace. And creating a real public space here with a plaza next to the transit station. This road here would be designed to be closed off, and maybe you could have festivals and concerts and places for kids, events, and things to bring the family to. And then a final phase where we look at, potentially adding another housing block, and this as just an idea, with Founders Park over here, these retailers kind of turn their back to the park, so this would add residential facing the park. Again, you can, pick and choose and let us know what you like and don't like. The other thing I want to say is that when you see these new buildings coming on, realistically, we would plan for those existing restaurants or retailers to be relocated into the new buildings. So they're not necessarily going away. So alternative B, so again, going back to existing conditions. And in this scenario, we started to create a center within the center of the place. So along Marshall Road, creating a public park. So that's your public amenity, things for everyone in Superior to come and enjoy and activate. Build the parking structure first, and then that provides the opportunity to build on the RTD land. So new mixed use and street terminating at the bus stop there, creating a destination around the transit center, but also visible from Marshall Road. And then a final phase, again, if development is successful and there is demand, the potential to move even west into the center with more residential and retail. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention on this one is that one thing we started to realize when we analyzed the center is that Marshall Road cuts down the middle. All of that not all of that traffic, but most of that traffic is going to Costco and Target, right? So it really does make a little bit of sense here to redirect Marshall Road and create a new, traffic spine here. That allows you to open up that center to really create a place that's less about traffic and auto-oriented. Back to the marketplace today, and then the third one we're calling connections and node. This one simply looks at existing pad or parking lot sites like the RTD lot, and then focusing on building connections. So RTD lot, again, building parking structure wrapped with housing and retail. A transit plaza, that's where you bring the kids and there's a splash park or activities for the family. And then a final phase really just looks at building those connections for bikes and pedestrians and really, expanding options for travel. When you talk about transit-oriented development, it's always about choices. Right now, that center is built for driving your car and shopping. And transit, leveraging transit means providing choices, housing choices that don't exist there today, and transportation choices that don't exist there today. So if you want to ride your bike and the family go have ice cream or something, or hop on the bus to downtown or Boulder, you have that opportunity to walk or bike or drive. So I'm going to walk through these real quick and in plan view. Sometimes it helps to look at these. So existing marketplace today, you can see Marshall Road coming in through here, and then just access to the sea of parking there. Scenario A, Center Drive, really building out that grid of transportation options and streets to access different places and creating more of a main street or center along Center Drive. Marketplace Square, option 2, scenario B, looks at building that community park in the center, redirecting Marshall Road up and through, and then again expanding the grid of options, but really creating a destination and place in the center. And then connections and node really, leaves Marshall Road as operating today, but expanding those options for sidewalks and bikeways to access the center, and then looking at some development around the transit station itself. So the scenario comparison real quick. Scenario A, B, and C, these go down. Relative cost, I'll cover that first. C, having the least amount of big changes would cost the least. Scenario A, Center Drive, would be number 2. And scenario B is the most expensive due to the major infrastructure change of rerouting Marshall Road. In terms of housing, we're looking at anywhere from 200 to 500 units capacity. Now that's potential, not necessarily saying that's what would be built, but it could in all of those scenarios. And then the retail, we're adding anywhere from, say, 30 to 60,000 square feet of retail, and then including replacing any retail that we have shown as being removed, going into new buildings. Some office, some civic space. So we're gonna talk about these and have a discussion afterwards, because a lot of times it's not, I like A, or it's like, I like pieces of A, but I'm concerned about this and that. So, but for fun, we're gonna ask you to vote on which one you like the best, or 1, 2, 3, not sure, or no opinion. So first we'll do that, and then we'll have a discussion about concerns or opportunities that you see. and then the rest was tied between 1 and 2. And maybe one of you said no opinion or 3. So, does anyone want to raise your hand and talk about why you chose what you chose, or what recommendations you would make?
Yeah. When you're starting to talk residential, where we're located here, we can sell houses or condos or apartments anytime. I mean, when you look at the across the road there, they open a building and boom, sold out. So instead of trying to put more people in there, we need to go after business, because in 3 years, all the permit funds are gone, and they become a burden on the rest of us taxpayers. We all have to pay more taxes to keep them going. Well, when we get residential, it helps pay our way. I mean, so if it don't work, we can say, okay, bulldoze it and build houses. They'd be sold before you got the buildings bulldozed. I mean, we have no problem out here selling houses. I mean, they sell like hotcakes. What we have trouble here is getting stores to come here, because it seems like at 5 o'clock, the market over there dies. Arby's, I mean, it was a great place at lunch. Buffalo Wild Wings, a great place at lunch. 2:30, 3 o'clock, it's like they rolled up the sidewalks. So we're not, as a community, we're not, it seems like on that side or Old Town, it's not really keeping the money or the people here. Tell them you want to sell them a house or a condo or whatever, vote first on the list. So I think we're kind of going, we need to sit down and figure out what businesses we need to draw here, give them incentives to come, to keep them here, like Broomfield did to the meat guy in Boulder. He's still over there, he's doing great. We need to draw business here, not houses. We can, if everything goes south, we can build houses in South. That means people will come here just because of the location so close to Boulder. You know, it's halfway to Denver. We got a great location for houses. But what we need to do is put all of our effort in getting businesses to think this is where we need to be, because we can draw from people. But we're not going to do that unless we start giving them incentives to come here, the businesses. I don't know about taxes. I don't know what it is. But we need business here. We don't need no more rooftops. We need business here.
So I can't speak to the business or incentive side, maybe Matt can add to this, but part of why retail centers are transforming and looking at housing options, adding them to that, is just because of what you said. They roll up the doors at 5 p.m. and if you have, it doesn't take a lot, you know, but getting, you know, a few apartments there that actually generate people, you know, all times of the day, besides when people are sleeping, you know, staying up later, walking to the restaurants, that really helps activate them, and it helps generate business. But we are looking at office uses too. We talked to some of the retailers today, and they thought, you know, maybe co-working spaces or things like that. I mean, Boulder and Denver are too expensive for a lot of companies. They're moving out. They need places to go, and 36 quarters right for that.
Not to break your bubble here, but we've been waiting for business to come for the last 20 years. From when MDC came and so many houses and so much business, we got the houses. We didn't get no business. And, you know, over here we got a little bit of ice arena, which is really not a big money maker for us because we split the revenues with the city of Louisville. But then 1,400 rooftops got put in there. So what I see as an old-time resident here is just fill it up with rooftops.
So I'm
And we're
gonna
done.
So I mean, what I'm hearing from you, and I think it's well taken, is that a couple things. First is short term. First thing we need to do is expand our efforts and come up with more ideas to expand the retail and potentially office base within the center as a way to try to improve the center, and that housing is more of a long-term thing that could potentially fill in if that's not successful. Also, what I'm hearing from you is that there's a lot of homes coming in from the east side, on the east side of McCaslin, and so better connectivity between the two centers might spur some of that activity as well.
If we put 1,400 rooftops over there and we get the right businesses to draw the people there for, say, more than just lunch,
Yeah.
but just as a tax base, I mean, we need business because we can sell houses anytime.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem is the revenue for the permits go away.
Just out of curiosity, when you say business, are you talking like office space business, or are you talking retail business?
We need more retail business. Office style businesses give us very little tax revenue, very, very little.
Yeah, I just wondered what you were talking.
We need retail, shoe stores,
And so, I mean,
restaurants, things that we get the right stuff in here, and we get that many homes in there, they're going to come. But you can't. I've heard this so much that let us put the rooftops in and the rest will come. Well, we put the rooftops in, and it hasn't came.
Yeah.
And now you're telling me that we're playing the same game. We're going to put some more rooftops, and then they'll come.
yeah, and I don't necessarily.
That's what I'm just tired of.
No, and I hear you. To be honest with you, I think that what we found is that the corridor is pretty amply retail. There's a lot of retail, so attracting a significant amount more to the community is going to be a challenge, especially given the fact that there's not a ton of growth that's going on, in the immediate area aside from that east of downtown. So I don't necessarily think the promise is if we build households, it's going to generate more retail. I think more the message is that bringing households has the potential to help increase vibrancy and support the existing retail, and with the focus of trying to maintain that and not have that go away or jump to Broomfield, as you're saying. And so I hear your point, but I'm just wanting to make sure that we're not necessarily saying bringing more households is going to drastically increase the demand for new retail. I think what we're saying is it's more of a way to help support what we have here and what's been planned on the east side as well.
And I want to shift gears and hear from some other folks. We've got a lot more to cover too tonight. So any other different thoughts or ideas on the, yes ma'am, in the back?
So one area that I haven't heard you guys mention, or anybody mention for that matter, is an arts district perhaps. And one, I just went to a seminar where they talk about where if like the marketplace was considered an art district, then you can get grants, and then artists bring people come into that area and revitalize it, and that's just the people that you can bring into the shops and the restaurants and things like that. So I'd love to consider the idea, or think about the idea of the marketplace being an arts district. I mean, there's empty buildings that could be art studios, or we don't have adequate library services and things like that. So it would be interesting to entertain some of those ideas in there, not just businesses and not just more restaurants and things like that.
Yeah, we definitely heard the interest in other community uses in the fall, but that's not something that we heard. So
has there been any movement from Amazon yet about doing something different with Whole Foods?
have you heard anything different, Stephen?
So they haven't started to propose changes on what they're going to do with that Whole Foods there?
Not specifically, no. Other questions, comments? Yes, sir, in the back.
I think one of my biggest concerns is in every single model, there is a massive parking garage that would be built above ground. And I think, again, some of the biggest concerns has been about congestion, and obviously having a massive parking garage there is going to generate a lot more congestion. And then in a lot of the models too that were shown, there's residential areas immediately on top of the parking garage. And I don't know how many people would be inclined to live in an area, even if it is a very nice townhouse or a condo or an apartment, what have you, right next to a large parking garage, and that could be potentially right by Marshall Road, which already has a lot of traffic going through there. So I don't see a lot of the appeal in having something like that there when we could have, and I like the idea of having an arts district, of really making this kind of a more unique area, because a lot of these approaches seemed a bit more on the conventional side that emphasized either retail or, more often than not, residential area, when I think we could make it a different approach that actually strives to make Superior a more unique place to visit as opposed to some of the other neighboring communities that we have.
Other comments?
Did any of the scenarios look at underground parking?
Yes. Yeah, the first one does put parking underground, scenario A, on the, where the RTD lot is today.
I think the challenge with that though is as soon as you start going down underground, the cost of building the parking doubles or triples almost. And so doing structured parking with an apartment now, trying to replace RTD's parking is going to be difficult from a market standpoint, and trying to put that underground is going to be even more difficult. And so I think that it would be nice because you don't have this big monolith above ground, but the feasibility of that economically is pretty limited unless the town was wanting to invest in that, but I'm not sure that's the best investment of town funds per se.
And none of the scenarios anticipate additional parking. So the premise of any of the parking garages is that you really have to replace RTD's existing parking, which is just under 300 spaces.
Is there any connection to US 36 and other off-ramps so people don't have to come off on McCaslin, down McCaslin, and then circle back around on
It's been considered in the past. There's certain distance separations for any, on or off ramp that I don't know that Superior has the benefit. Like even 88th Street, there's not going to be a connection there because of how close it is to the first Flatiron exit. So that's what we've heard to date or historically.
Okay. Any last comments? We need to keep moving. We got a lot more to cover. So
The other thing is that there will be an online survey that replicates this presentation, so if you want to give it more thought and provide comments online, you can do that as well.
great. All right. So we're going to shift gears and talk about original town and vicinity. And we talked about these areas individually in the fall, but just to give you a little bit of context. So while there is no official firm boundary for original town, what we're kind of looking at is basically south of Marshall, McCaslin, and then you've got the open space on the south, and then your existing neighborhoods on the west. So to put it into context, as we start to think about some of the potential changes that you might see in original town, you've got about 121 homes that exist in that area today, and about 356 homes in Northwest Superior as a whole. So that kind of puts it into context when we start thinking about the changes in downtown or some of the different scenarios that we're looking at in the marketplace. So just to give you an idea, and based on your current zoning, so what's on the books today, you have the potential for 100 or more new units in this area in the future. If we do nothing, this is possible. So basically, that could occur through a variety of ways. You have the potential to see infill on vacant lots. You have the potential for redevelopment of existing homes or non-conforming uses. So if someone comes in, buys a lot, tears down the existing house, builds a new one, that could happen. You could see the industrial areas in this area rezoned to residential. So that's another way that might happen. And then one of the biggest potential areas where you're likely to see change is the 2nd Avenue property. So this is just west of the roundabout, kind of sits down below McCaslin there, and abuts 2nd Avenue. And so there have been ideas floated for that property in the recent past. So that's very much an area that's being looked at currently. And again, that's something that's already got zoning for residential. So those are kind of the things that we've been using to kind of ground this conversation in terms of if we kind of proceed with the rules that we have in place now, these are some of the things that we might see happen. So we asked last fall, some of our original conversations, we talked about whether or not the town should be looking at some sort of design standards or other tools to help guide future growth in this area. And the responses were a little bit mixed. We heard definitely some interest in looking at some potential guidance, people who are particularly concerned about the types of growth that had happened already and wanted to make sure that there were some tools in place. At 33, about a third of folks said, not sure, but I think it's something we really need to look at further. And so that's really why we're continuing this conversation. We asked also what types of issues folks were most concerned about when we think about the regional town. The scale of kind of the new development that's happened is really what a lot of people point to. The Maple Street homes are often brought up in conversation as wow, those are a lot bigger than what's out here today. I'm not necessarily too crazy about that. It's one example of what kind of your typical single family home, what the market is kind of looking for in a lot of those areas. And so we talked about the overall mix of housing, and we'll talk more about these things tonight. The overall density, to your point, sir, about just the overall number of people in the area, that's part of the conversation. And then circulation and access is absolutely part of the discussion here as well. So as we think about what's happening around original town, how that affects this area is very much part of the conversation. So in terms of where we go from here, we're going to talk about what's possible in more detail under current zoning, give you some actual examples. Some's done a lot of modeling work to look at, based on the zoning that's in place, here's what could happen, just to give you a feel for some potential scenarios. And then we're going to talk about different ways that we can potentially address these different types of issues that we've heard concerns about. So there's a lot of different layers to this, so bear with me as we kind of go through that. But we'll start first, a little bit more background, just so everybody's got the same information. So the RL zone district is this light yellow area in the center, and this is basically your single family zone. So this is, kind of the largest portion of that area. Density allowance in that area is about 6 dwelling units per acre. You've got your basic setbacks. Minimum lot area of 7,000 square feet. Lot coverage, you could go up to 40%. Your average out there, your median out there today is about 25%. So right off the bat, that shows you that, you're likely to see, you have the potential to see so much larger homes in the future based on that current zoning if someone were to choose to build on those lots. The other change you would likely see is in the height of homes in that area. So as you well know, a lot of the homes in that area are single story. They're much smaller scale, so the median height in that area is about 16 feet. Your current regulations allow for up to 32 feet, just another factor to take into account. The other change that's potentially out there that isn't addressed on this slide, that we'll talk a little bit more about, is that this is an area of town that has alleys. That's kind of a historic pattern that's been there from the beginning, and a lot of the homes didn't have front-loaded garages, the homes that exist. So you've started to see some newer homes adding that. That's a change in dynamic that's likely to continue based on your current regulations. So just something that we'll ask for your feedback on as we go further. So I'm going to walk through some of the potential scenarios in terms of what could happen today for infill or redevelopment in the RL areas. So what Sung has done is taken some representative blocks. This isn't any particular block, but just trying to get a flavor of the range of homes that are out there. We heard from residents that the variety, the diversity of this area is one of the things that you like about this area. The typical lots are 50 by 140, but there's a lot of variety out there. Some are larger. So taking one of those, so basically we've used the Maple Street homes just because that's something that people can relate to, and looked at how that might fit in different contexts in terms of some of those existing lots. So just gives you a feel for how that might change over time. And you see, I mentioned the front-loaded garages, so that's a pattern that starts to shift. So this could happen anywhere within that RL area. The other thing that could happen in this area is that you could see some of the larger lots subdivided back to the original 50 by 140 foot lots. That's something that's in your code now. You're allowed to do that. You can go back and subdivide that. So if you have a lot that currently reflects that larger amount, as in our example on the top, you could come in and you could split it into 3 lots and build 3 homes. So that's a change, and that's something people should be aware of. It's an opportunity for some folks. Other folks might not like that, and so that's part of what we wanted to talk about tonight, is just making sure everybody was aware of the different possibilities and have a conversation about where you want to go. So that's another RL example. And then we'll talk a little bit about the RM zone. So, in terms of the zoning parameters, the main differences to be aware of: housing types. So these are the orange areas that we talked about, and potentially it could be this IL area as well, if someone chose to do that in the future. But you can have multifamily housing in this area. So this could be a duplex, 2 units, it could be a triplex, up to 6 units per lot. So kind of small scale multifamily. So that's different than what's in the bulk of original town today. And that's based on your current zoning, so it's slightly more dense than what you have in the bulk of that area. Setbacks are basically the same. The lot areas are a little bit smaller, but your lot coverage and your building height is the same. So basically, a little bit more dense, broader mix of housing that you might see in those areas. So we looked at some representative RM areas in terms of how that might change over time. So in this scenario, someone takes 2 lots, consolidates those, and these are replatted, redeveloped to accommodate duplexes. So in this case, we've got alley-loaded garages, and similar to Cheney scenarios, these are all just representative ideas of what could happen. Another scenario would be to take the same 2 lots and to incorporate a 4-plex. So you can see how that small scale multifamily starts to feel a little bit bigger when they're attached. And in this case, you've got some front-loaded, you've got some rear-loaded garages. So again, just an idea of kind of what's possible under your current zoning. So the other area we wanted to talk about in RM, I mentioned there's been some recent conversation, ongoing conversation about the 2nd Avenue property just west of the roundabout. And this is there were concepts that were explored last spring. This is from town board meeting last May. So this was an example an applicant brought forward under current zoning. So this is a scenario that could happen today. They've already got the entitlements to do that. And you can see, they basically carried forward the alley concept, single family homes on similar size lots as what's in original town, with a little bit of small scale multifamily townhomes kind of on that chasm edge. So gives you an idea of what's possible today in that scenario. But they also did some exploration of what might be able to happen through the plan development process. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with what that means, it's basically a special process that someone can choose to go through. It's meant to be more flexible, gives you some different options, but it also requires a lot more process. So it's a more difficult process for someone to go through. It's less certain for them in terms of whether they're going to get their approvals or not. So this would be sort of their option B. And you can see that some of the different changes related to, and actually let me go back. Oops. So one of some of the feedback that they got on this scenario and concerns related to access, and so this direct access into original town. And so that's part of why this scenario was explored, which kind of removed that. In this case, there actually is no access to original town. There's a lot of different ways to skin this cat, but I think, recognizing the different types of issues we heard, here's 2 different ways that site could play out. This one does not have alleys. This could potentially be all front-loaded garages along 2nd Avenue there. And you don't have that access. So it functions basically as a separate neighborhood. So, that's possible. There are a lot of different ideas that could be floated for that. But just to give you a sense of what some options might be for that in terms of new development in original town. So what we're going to talk about first is just some potential tools in terms of, how do you or how could you come at the idea of trying to create more compatible development in original town. And so I'm going to walk you through each of these. There are a lot of follow-up questions to this once we get through the initial tools, but just to give you a sense of, if what we hear coming out of this round is we're concerned about X, Y, and Z, and yes, we think the town should take some action on this, how might we move forward? So just to give you a feel for that. So I'll walk you through each of these. The first one is no action. So basically, we're happy with the tools we have. Any of those scenarios that you showed us, we're comfortable with. That's a fine answer in terms of kind of what comes out of this conversation. But we want to walk you through B, C, and D, and those would all kind of address a similar range of issues based on what we've heard from the community so far. So when we talk about site design, we talk about setbacks, lot coverage, orientation of the garage, those types of things. And then we talk about building, massing, and form. That's really where we get at, do we want a big blocky house next to a little house? Those are the types of conversations you can start to get into. So how big it is, are the walls just, is it just a box? Is there some articulation? Does roof form matter? All of those types of things we would have to come back to and really think about what's most important to you. So scenario A, maintain existing tools. And again, this is based on the RL or the RM zones that you have in place or the PD process. And in terms of advantages and disadvantages, I think what people like about the current zoning, it's very predictable. You know what you can do. I think the challenges we've heard is that it's not necessarily reflective of what's out there today. So it can lead to some surprises down the road. So that's one option to consider. Scenario B is to look at some design guidelines for this area. So guidelines are advisory. This is kind of a should versus a shall approach. It's the kinder, gentler approach in terms of giving some broad ideas about the types of development that you might like to see in this area, and then hoping and asking and kind of working with applicants to kind of figure out what that means in the context. So, guidelines, some people like them because they are very flexible. I think the flip side of that is they're pretty unpredictable in terms of what the results are going to be. You're really at the mercy of the applicant, and it puts a pretty heavy burden on your staff in terms of having to really work back and forth and potentially your planning commission to kind of get the outcomes that you like. So that's one option that you might consider. Another option is to look at more formal standards or an overlay district. So when we talk about an overlay district, that would be basically a boundary that we would define and sit on top of your existing zoning and then modify some different aspects of that, add the design standards to that. So this changes the ideas in terms of taking some of those concepts from the guidelines in terms of compatibility and saying, being more specific about, the types of things that would change. So one example would be, establishing a bulk plan. So, this red line would come up from the setbacks. It would be basically the building envelope within which you could build. That's a tool that some communities use. It reduces the overall scale and mass of the home. Another example would be to look at the overall lot coverage. I talked about the 40%, do you get a 30, 35? There's a lot of different ways to do that. Some communities use a set percentage, or say you can have, a certain percentage above what's existing today, say 125%. So we're not here to talk about the numbers necessarily, but just to give you an idea of the types of tools, that might be built into something like that. So this is something that would be regulatory applicants would be required to comply. It's less flexible, But I think when we talk about tools like this, a lot of times, the idea of knowing what to expect is something that can be appealing for people. It's more predictable, easier to administer, and you're more likely to see, specific changes in terms of what you're trying to accomplish. So that's an option. And then the last one we'll talk about is kind of building on C. And so basically you might have some new standards to address the things that are most important to you, but you might build in some incentives to say, we want to try to encourage, for example, that the original housing stock is preserved. That's something that we want to see change, and we're going to ask a question about that, whether or not that's really a goal that the community wants to focus on. So you might provide some incentives in terms of lot coverage or height in response to someone who says, we're going to preserve our existing home. It's one of the original homes in original Superior. We're going to do an addition, and if we do X, Y, and Z, we'll be able to achieve that 40% lot coverage because we achieve those other objectives. So this is kind of a little bit of the carrot and the stick approach. There's a lot of different ways you can build in incentives, and again, this is a way to kind of provide a little bit more predictability, but still maintain a more flexible approach. And so again, these are just examples in terms of what might, what ideas might be explored if you were to go down this path. So one of the questions we met with Planning Commission last week is just, trying to give folks a sense of, well, when would this kick in? If I own a home in original town, if I want to build a back deck, when would this stuff really kick in? And typically, when communities adopt design guidelines or standards, it's really going to only kick in when you do major changes. So if you scrape a home, you want to build a new home, then they're going to apply. If you want to do a addition that is more than double the size of your existing home, then it might kick in. And so that would be part of the process of kind of developing any tools, would be to determine when you want them to kick in. And so those are all things that could be discussed further, but those are kind of the typical parameters. So, questions about the tools generally before we get into more kind of the general preferences and the more detailed questions? Any clarification questions? Okay. We'll have more time to talk here in a moment too, but so again, these first blush, just general reactions in terms of the types of options that we talked about. Do you think the town should pursue any of these options, B, C, D, or D, or should we stick with what we have in terms of existing tools? Not sure, no opinion. And then also, 5 is that recognizing you may have some combination. You could do some guidelines, some standards, a combination of those things. Is it not? Perfect. Yeah. Thank you.
I think we lost one, so.
Okay. All right. Going once. Okay. So about 30%. Stick with what we've got. 5. So we've got a mix in terms of different options. So a little bit of a mixed bag still. So let's get in and try to talk more about some of the specific issues. So the next 3 questions are really going to focus more on kind of specifics in terms of, first we're going to talk about site design. So if the town were to pursue B, C, or D, or some combination of those for future infill and redevelopment, which of these things should really be a focus of that? Reduce lot coverage allowances, wider setbacks, garage orientation, and we'll talk about, did it? Oh.
I don't know why they just keep doing that.
Oops. Going once. All right. So anyone who said other, have any specific comments on suggestions on that? What you had in mind? Okay. All right. So this next one, hopefully some alternative tools are considered. And again, if you have other ideas and you don't necessarily want to share them tonight, I would encourage you to go online and let us know. That would be helpful. Okay. All right, so for all of the above, it's not the same as none of the above. So as we knew, this is one of our biggest challenges in terms of this area. That, all right, so the next one is specific to, I wanted you to think about the 2nd Avenue site in particular. I talked about, that's really one of the biggest areas in this area where you could see some pretty significant change. So we talked about the PD scenario where you could have, front-loaded garages along that whole stretch. Are you comfortable with that idea? Should there be some additional standards or different considerations for new development? So larger site where you could have a fair number of homes versus, a single infill project. So we've got kind of variety of housing styles, mix of housing types, knowing that you can do more than just single family. Should there be alley orientation for that area?
And you can select more than one.
Yeah, I'm thinking that. You can do more than one, or you can select
All of the above.
all of the above. And these are based on, the access, things that we've heard, but also things that are typically addressed for communities that have residential standards for new development. All right. Okay. So it looks like variety is important. Kind of a mixed bag a little bit. 5 is the single-family housing along that shared street frontage. That can give you a nice transition. So some different things to play with there. Okay. So the next few questions. And we can't reset the entire thing or we'll lose the results, so I apologize for the technical glitch here. But should this town take steps, through, for example, the incentives that we talked about, is it really the intent or the concern for residents that the original housing stock will be redeveloped? Is there an idea of a desire to try to encourage protection or retention of that over time and, encourage additions instead of redevelopment? Or is it really just that, new development comes in, we want it to be, a different scale or whatnot? So this is an important distinction in this conversation, if that's a priority or if it's really just, what the area evolves to over time. Okay, going once. All right, you guys are making this even harder. So we'll have to arm wrestle up here at the end, I guess. Okay, so. So this next question focuses on that lot splitting provision that I talked about. So just a reminder, if you have a large lot in original town now, you have the ability to come in and to subdivide that into the original lot, so 50 by 140, and add 1 unit on each of those. Should that be something that's carried forward in terms of how this area transitions over time? There's not a lot of those, but they're there, and that's not something that a lot of folks are aware of. So either, yes, we should continue through additional, one option would be to continue it as it stands, which is through the administrative review process, so a pretty streamlined process. You could continue it and have additional review, or you could look at changing that. So, okay. So strong, I like it. Strong interest, strong direction. Cool. So the next thing we're going to talk about is housing options. And so this came up in the context of, one of the things that you're not permitted to do in original town today, there are some non-conforming examples, but is to build an accessory dwelling unit. And this is, it's sometimes called a granny flat or a mother-in-law suite, those types of things where you have a small unit that's added either to the back of your property, it could be part of the primary structure with a separate entrance. So these are two examples from Louisville, actually. So here's one above a garage, this one's above a garage as well. So it's important to know that when people make a choice, when communities make a choice to allow accessory dwelling units, they're typically allowed with some standards for those. So it's not just a, go for it, however big you want to make it. So they're typically limited in size. So, 6 feet, they could be as smaller than 600 square feet. Some communities allow up to 800 square feet. But the point is it's proportionately smaller than your original home. So it's secondary to what you have now. There may also be considerations about, designing it to look similar to the primary dwelling. A lot of different ways to come at that. I just want you to be aware that it wouldn't just be a, sign on the dotted line and then that would just be go for it. There would be a lot of conversation about what that might look like. So the question is whether or not the town should explore adding accessory dwelling units and accessory dwelling unit ordinance for original town and vicinity. And there's several different ways that could play out. It could be just in the RL areas, it could be in just the RM areas, or you could look at both. So just want to kind of get a feel for ideas, opinions about should this even be considered further based on these conversations. All right, going once. All right.
Yep.
Yay! Direction. Okay. So before we move on, though, so we do have a third of you said no, don't support. What are you? Anyone want to kind of weigh in on their kind of primary reasons why they said not really interested in that? Okay. You don't have to. I know it's a small room, so. Okay, so in terms of what we've kind of covered, are there any other types of site design standards? And this is all assuming you selected the one that said you would like to explore these ideas. Any other issues that we haven't talked about tonight, things that you think are just paramount to this conversation that we've missed? In terms of what potentially concerns you about what might happen, types of development in the future. Any ideas or thoughts?
A question occurred to me on the accessory dwelling unit. If somebody split a lot and built another house to rent and then put an accessory dwelling unit on that house, they've now created two families that they're renting to. That's not quite multifamily, but how does that play into things? Does it require the primary the resident, the owner to actually live in one of the units, and how does that play?
There's a lot of different ways it plays out. Some communities try to restrict, that those could only be someone in your family that lives in that unit, or that you can, only rent that unit. There's a lot of different things. The trick is administering that is really, really tricky. And so you can certainly attempt to try to control that, but it's often one of those provisions that gets not overlooked, but it's really hard to kind of really control. So you have to have some confidence that it's going to be probably more complaint driven in terms of if someone's if something's not working out, it's going to be handled more through complaints versus someone kind of going around and making sure that I know that they don't know each other and they're living in that back unit. So it's tricky. Yes.
So some of the houses, as you know, in the original town are pretty small, and if they added accessory dwellings, they might not, in some cases, even fit that smaller definition that you've decided. So I think that it would be behoove us to explore the idea that they might be able to have a slightly larger and not be limited based on other scenarios in other towns.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, those are just representative. I think.
Yeah, no, I just
wanna.
It's just something that
scale
came
it.
to mind because some of the houses are quite small.
Some of them may be 800 square feet to begin with, or even smaller. So
Yes,
yeah, absolutely. Good point. Other comments or questions? Yeah, Bob.
Just one more. I brought up the residential character street, that RCS zoning that we have that's not in use anywhere, but it exists, right? And so that just puts 3 dwelling units on it. I think you're allowed to put up to 3. I don't think it says 3, but up to 3 dwelling units on a property, which sort of also is similar to what having a house with an accessory dwelling unit. It seems like that ought to at least be out there for discussion, if that makes sense in any of the areas. I don't think it's going to change the entire character, but it also opens up some other opportunities depending on the street for, like George was mentioning, bringing businesses in, right? So doctors and lawyers and other businesses can run a business out of home, on a residential character street under the RCS zoning. So just throw that out there so people are aware of it and what it's for and what it does.
Okay. Other comments, questions?
Yeah, on that RSC zone, you have to have the whole block before you can do the RSC zoning. Isn't that correct?
So it hasn't actually been used before.
Yeah, it's never been used, but I think it was set up to be kind of a transition for the marketplace to transition to the original town. That's why that was set up years ago. I think it was set up in the 90s, late 90s or something. And it was kind of going to be set up for a buffer, but you had to contain the whole block before. If one person owned one lot on that block, you couldn't do RSC zoning.
Right.
It had to be the whole 6 lots.
It's a little tougher to
Right.
implement.
Right.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Okay. So in terms of where we go from here, so we've got a follow-up meeting on Wednesday night at the community room in the sports stable. We are going to have the online questionnaire available in the next day or two. So, again, if you have other thoughts, feel free to weigh in that way as well. We'll have it up for at least a couple of weeks, potentially longer, depending on kind of how much traction we get and, kind of see whether or not there's interest in continuing it longer. So we are shooting to take what we hear from these meetings, 3 meetings that we're having this week, the online questionnaire results. We'll kind of distill all that like we did last time, go back to Planning Commission. We're trying to sort out a date right now, probably towards the late June, early July timeframe. So we'll keep everybody posted on that. And that would be kind of our next step in terms of here's what we heard, here's where we have clear direction, either we do or we don't. So we'll kind of be sorting through all of that in terms of where we go from there. And then based on that conversation, go to the town board. We'll have quite a bit back and forth over the summer months, and then shooting to come back to the community in the September timeframe to kind of share with you, the results of all of this. Maybe some preliminary directions based on what we've heard. We may have clear direction in some areas and not in others, and that's part of just what we're going to have to sort through. So. Thank you very much for your patience and giving us your feedback tonight. We really appreciate it.